All right, enough of the various Arcadian Vanguard tomfoolery. It's time for the main event of today's program on The Experience. The big news was broken again by the Wall Street Journal. It's not $3 million that Vince McMahon has paid out in hush money. It's $12 million. $12 million. He wouldn't pay Brett $2 million. And Brett was selling him tickets, just not blowing him.
Yeah, no one ever realized that's why Vince said he couldn't afford the contract. Everyone's like, what do you mean he can't afford the contract?
That was before all of this stuff. That was before Vince didn't have $12 million to see. I still remember he would bring this up sometimes just apropos of nothing. If you just an advance for something wasn't very good or anything. Well, I remember that $6 million that came out of my ass last year or whatever. In 1995, the company, for the first time ever, lost money. It was $6 million, and he was pissed about it 2 years later. When they had turned things around, he was still pissed about that. So I refuse to believe that the Vince McMahon of 1997 would have just, here's $7 million to you and $1 million to you and $3 million to you, and here's a few more million. Fuck. But I got an email. This was before the big news came out in the Wall Street Journal on Friday, and we'll go over that story in a second. But this is from Chris, and just real quick, because we talked about something like this. Hi, Jim and Brian. I just wanted to touch base with you two on the Vince McMahon sex scandal plaguing WWE. Jim has been adamant that if Vince had just hired a sex worker, actually I said a hooker, but sex worker sounds a little more upscale, for his quote-unquote needs, he wouldn't have to pay out the $3 million and it wouldn't be as big of a controversy. So, Chris goes on to say, I asked a high-end sex worker recently what $3 million would buy Vince, and I thought the two of you would like to know the result. Actually, I'd like to know the high-end sex worker that you were talking to and any pertinent details such as contact information, but I'll take this.
Hi, you looking to have a good time? No, I'm looking for information. Tell me.
Yeah.
Show me your taxes.
At a rate of I'm looking to have some good information there. At a rate of $1,000 a day for engagements, Vince could have had a high-end sex worker for 8 years, excluding gifts, dinners, and other extra expenses, which is solid proof that Vince is an idiot for not hiring a professional. This was before the latest revelation, so in case you can't do the math, if you get a high-end sex worker for 8 years for $3 million, you can get one for 32 years for $12 million. I mean, the couple, I can't remember their names, but there was a married couple, a man and a woman, that was the maid and the groundskeeper and various, jack of all trades around the house in Stamford there in the 90s. I don't think he was paying them that much money, and they were doing quite a bit more strenuous work. Well, I don't know how strenuous the work that the paralegal and these other people were doing, but it probably didn't last as long. They didn't do it 8 hours a day.
Can we start with that, if you don't mind? Because It's in this article that was in the Wall Street Journal, and it kind of finishes what we started last time. You said the paralegal. Is she a paralegal?
Well, apparently not. I mean, I'm not saying she's not licensed to be a paralegal, but apparently now the Journal story said she didn't apply for the job with the WWE at all. She met Vince at the condo in Stamford that Vince was living in, which we've heard about that he got a condo, and I think, didn't he have another place in New York, in the city?
Yeah.
And Linda's been wherever the heck Linda's been for however long.
Florida.
But I think it's Florida. Well, maybe she got the big house down there. He had a $10 million place in Florida. He used to go for 2 weeks at Christmas during the break, and he'd work from there. That's the only time he ever saw that $10 million house. But anyway, so she didn't apply for the job. She met him at the condo in Stamford where they were both living, and he suggested that she come and take the job. which she was hired at the entry-level salary of $100,000 a year.
And again, she wasn't a paralegal because her resume had law school on it. They put her in that department and paid her $100,000.
You know what? I took German in the 6th grade. Sprechen Sie Deutsch? I could be a translator.
The other interesting thing about the
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, the other interesting thing about the person who, it turns out you may have been right, she may have been an illegal paralegal, is it said that when working in the law department, she made everyone uncomfortable because she kept talking about Vince.
Well, you got the article there, right?
I do.
And it's the Wall Street Journal, WSJ.com. We want to plug everybody. I can't remember all 3 of the authors. They said 3 reporters working on it. One of them was Joe Flint, and he honestly, I apologize, Joe, although I don't think he listens to the show regularly, but he called me, left me a message telling me that he was researching a story like this. I did not get back to him because, as we will find out here shortly, I didn't have anything germane to add to this conversation.
Yes, you did. You're referenced in the article.
How's that?
And in a 2006 agreement, a former manager who had worked 10 years for Mr. McMahon before he allegedly initiated a sexual relationship. That was around the time you left OVW, wasn't it?
Yeah, but I'd been there 12 years.
Former manager.
Ixnay. Ixnay on the Oblob J.
Well, before we have too much fun here, let's give credit where it is due. Joe Flint, Ted Mann, and Joe Palazzolo, who was the person who also authored the previous article about this, so he's obviously working that Vince McMahon beat. The article, WWE's Vince McMahon agreed to pay $12 million in hush money to 4 women. The longtime chief of World Wrestling Entertainment, Inc., secured non-disclosure agreements that keep secret allegations of sexual misconduct and infidelity. Let me stop there and ask you something, because it's the one thing I kept thinking about that it's not in this article, and it's kind of more something to opine about with your buddies. The infidelity thing, I don't think really matters. I mean, this marriage has been a sham for a long time, so what the fuck was happening that they needed NDAs? Because that ain't it.
Well, and I mean, the publicly traded company, and they don't want bad publicity and a blah, blah, blah. But infidelity gets Vince over with the fan base. But for the same reason that Ric Flair, the Nature Boy in his prime, became a cool heel and later on became a cultural touchstone, because every guy wants to be the guy that makes all the money and fucks all the women. And they don't care how that happens. So, like I mentioned, when Vince came out, the WWE fans in the arena brought the house down for him because he's the one that brought them all this. They love this and they like him for that. Even though the disenfranchised wrestling fans, the ones that don't like the WWE anymore, they blame Vince kind of for running them off. But in front of his people, and when he's accused of infidelity, nobody gives a shit about that. Like you said, everybody wants to know the dirt, but down deep they're going, yeah, that fuck, he's almost 80 years old, he's still fucking. So that's not a big deal. Where it comes down to a problem for the company is because of the publicly traded aspect and stockholders and SEC regulations. And as we mentioned, we'll have Stephen P. New on the Drive-Thru this week, talk about some of those things. But if this was still the old WWF and a private company, nobody'd even know about this. But somebody is feeding this information because of the publicly traded aspect of the thing. They see an opening, they see an opportunity for whatever their thing is. But yeah, like you said, infidelity, big deal. And he spit on the sidewalk and crossed against the light. Nobody gives a shit.
And in terms of, if you want to talk about the reporting here, they're doing a great job, but in terms of who's leaking what, if I had to put my money on it, it's coming out of the board of directors, and let's see what happens. Let's see if Nick Khan's head rolls. Because who benefits from Vince being pushed out of the way? Because that's what this is. The fact that this is leaking isn't so we do a thorough investigation and he stays. This shit is leaking because someone's trying to get Vince out of that company.
Right. That's the only possible outcome that this whole thing would have come up over. But let's pick and choose in the article. We may not go in chronological order, but we were talking about the paralegal and the questionable way she got hired, but read the part where it talks about how she couldn't shut up about Vince. That apparently she wasn't smart to the wrestling business, obviously, because it was a complete strange thing to her. She'd never been in it and never even applied for a job in it. But one would think that getting a job under those circumstances, one would keep one's mouth shut. But apparently it was the opposite. Read that part if you
Well,
would.
yeah, there's a few paragraphs here that relate directly to that. The former paralegal to whom Mr. McMahon agreed to pay $3 million was brought into the company as a legal assistant in 2019, according to people familiar with the matter. She never applied for the job, these people said. Mr. McMahon had met her at his Stamford, Connecticut condo building, where both were living, the people said. WWE placed her in the legal department because the woman's resume said she had attended law school, the people said. The woman often talked with colleagues in the department about her close relationship with Mr. McMahon, the people familiar with the matter said. The talk about Mr. McMahon was so frequent that her boss asked her to stop, saying she was making other employees uncomfortable, according to one of the people. In 2021, the woman transferred from the legal department to talent relations under Mr. Laurinaitis, who returned to the role he had held a decade earlier. We'll talk more about him in a little bit. WWE considered raising the woman's annual salary from $100,000 to around $300,000 at Mr. McMahon's request. According to people familiar with the matter, the company settled on a base salary of $200,000 and a director-level position. An anonymous email sent to the board on March 30th this year and viewed by the Journal alleged that Mr. McMahon increased the woman's salary after he began a sexual relationship with her. The email alleged that Mr. McMahon gave her like a toy to Mr. Laurinaitis.
Well, some of that has obviously been heard before, but not the specifics of she was a blabbermouth and they met in the condo and etc. But again, that just accounted for the tip of the iceberg, the $3 million. And the illegal paralegal. But now the thrust of this story was they have found, and they never say these are all the NDAs. They just say now that these have been reported and they're under investigation as well, right? But did they ever say, well, we know that these are the extent of them, or just this is more?
We just know that this is more. We don't even know if this is everything the board has. We don't know if the board has more. We just know that this is what's out there. And we also have to assume that there's stories that may not have an NDA attached. Not everyone leaves with, okay, I'll just take a payoff and leave. And I'm saying that more casually than someone who may have been victimized if that's what happened. But there may be people say, no, fuck you. I'm not taking your money. We don't know what else is out there.
Or there might be people that saying, you know what, I just want out of this and I'm not going to say anything to anybody because it'll just drag me into chaos. Because this, a lot of people may not want to be on the cover of the Wall Street Journal for, having an inappropriate relationship. But you got to think, isn't this, I can't even believe I'm saying this, and I've talked about how that this just gobsmacks me about Vince, because I cannot see the Vince McMahon that I knew as a guy that would even have a naked picture of himself. It's like somebody telling you, I'm not saying I had a fatherly relationship with Vince, like who was it, Sean or Brett or whoever said these things, but I'm talking about he was like a friendly high school principal. And every once in a while, when the kids in the room would get fucking too rowdy, he'd drop those glasses and look over the top of them down his nose, and everybody would sit up a little straighter and adjust their tie. If you had held a gun to me and said, yes or no, does Vince McMahon own a naked photo of himself? I would have said, feel free to say no, Cornette, because that's a safe bet. And I don't know what it had to be. Like we talked about before when the first story came out, when they went public, he went out of his fucking mind. I mean, he
even look at the booking. Look at the way he booked himself with all the women on TV. Right around the time he became a billionaire on paper.
Yeah, it's like suddenly he goes from, Ben Stein supervising study hall to goddamn Weekend at Bernie's. It's just, So I'm astonished by this whole thing, but as I said, the article goes into there's more, including one was 7 million.
Yeah, see, that's the interesting one. I have that
and
here.
They're bringing talent into this. Go ahead, we'll spill those beans.
Yeah, because I have something to say about this. The previously unreported settlements include a $7.5 million pact with a former wrestler who alleged that Mr. McMahon coerced her into giving him oral sex and then demoted her, and ultimately declined to renew her contract in 2005 after she resisted further sexual encounters, according to people familiar with the matter. The wrestler and her attorney approached Mr. McMahon in 2018 and negotiated a payment in return for her silence, the people said. So let's stop there, and I only want to stop there for one reason, and we can talk about whatever you want with it.
Well, I'm wondering about why it took 12 or 13 years to come back around on that one. Go ahead.
Well, there's a lot of interesting things timing-wise that were happening around that period of time, too, but what got me was assuming this happened, and he coerced this talent into giving him a blowjob, and then demoted her and fired her. I don't know what demoted would be. There are different people that have had different thoughts, but if that really happened, that's not even the diva blowjob story that I know. That everyone knows.
That a lot of people from the airplane that has been bandied around, because when they got their own airplane and then Vince would have private meetings and writers would be scuttled off to the galley area or something during the private meeting or whatever. There's been those going around, but that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like it's DUI. If there's 4 of them that we know about, how many more don't we know about, and how many times did somebody get away with something?
Is there anyone on the active roster right now that's being treated favorably because of it? I mean, that matters too.
And I think that's what ties into, a lot of these discussions is before, when it was a paralegal, and even if it was the $3 million was Vince's own personal money, still the company money was paying this apparently unqualified person to do some level of business. But now you're talking about talent and people on the roster, and in a publicly traded company where not only the majority owner, but the guy who's the boss of basically everything is now having inappropriate relationships with the stars of the television program. That affects the company because he's still the guy that's running creative and still the guy that decides who gets on TV and who doesn't.
Well, here's another passage, Jim, about another allegation, apparently from another wrestler, or at least on-air personality based on the way it's written here. In another previously unreported deal, a WWE contractor presented the company with unsolicited nude photos of Mr. McMahon she reported receiving from him, and alleged that he had sexually harassed her on the job, according to people familiar with the woman's 2008 non-disclosure agreement. Mr. McMahon agreed to pay her...
Hold on 1 second. Contractor, just to not skip over that, that's somebody that would have been like in the television studio end, not even working there full time, but just like people, they contractors are brought in as this is the sound people, or these are the catering people, or at an arena, these are the crew that we brought in to do something. So that we're not even talking about an employee now. Just he saw somebody and said, "Boy, she needs some pictures of Captain Howdy."
Do we know that though? I mean, the fact that the Wall Street Journal is using the term contractor and the wrestlers are independent contractors.
Oh, well, okay, maybe misapplying a term.
Yeah, we don't know for sure. Yeah. But to finish this one off, according to the non-disclosure agreement, people familiar with it, Mr. McMahon agreed to pay her roughly $1 million. And
if he'd ever asked me for a blowjob for $1 million in 1996, I wasn't as well off as I am today.
Oh, will you stop it? And in a 2006 agreement, a former manager who had worked 10 years for Mr. McMahon before he allegedly initiated a sexual relationship with her was paid $1 million to keep quiet about it, according to people familiar with the deal. And then the Journal talks about the previous story they had about the illegal paralegal.
And I know a lot of names were bandied around as who could this be? And everybody's trying to put the thing together. And I heard somebody mention Molly Holly. I'm like, are you completely out of your fucking mind? I mean, there's very few things I'd bet the farm on anymore. But, You know, they used to say so-and-so's not that kind of girl. Well, figure Molly Holly not being that kind of girl.
You had the best line ever about one of the girls, and it made me laugh.
I was going to say, you mentioned, well, somebody said Jackie Gate. I said, are you out of your fucking mind? Charlie Haas would have fucking killed Vince McMahon. Charlie Haas punched the fuck out of Grizzly Redwood for stepping on his cowboy hat.
That's what you said. I didn't say Jackie Gator for the record. I said people were trying to put two and two together.
Throwing all these names. And and Jackie, I knew Jackie and worked with Jackie. I sound like, who was it, Lloyd Benson in the vice presidential debate. But I know it wasn't Jackie Gator. Let's just put that down there.
When I said to you, that's what you said. You said, he punched Grizzly Redwood for stepping on his hat. He would kill Vince McMahon. He would.
I wouldn't have been able to, when Charlie worked with me 10 years ago in Ring of Honor, I wouldn't have been able to stop him from cutting promos about it if that had happened. That would have been a fucking issue with Charlie Haas. So no, it wasn't. But who knows who it was? The point is, a lot of money floating around for people not to talk about shit that I just am astonished at. It's not that I didn't think that Vince liked pussy. It's that I always thought Vince was smarter than this or more in control of him. This is a guy that hates to sneeze because he's not in control, and he got
in a condo closer to the office. He couldn't even drive to Greenwich anymore. He said, I'm going to stay closer to home, closer to bed.
And so I'm just astonished by this, that he wasn't smarter or straighter or more in control of his activities, that he would do this and take this risk and do these things. And, the only reason that, there's been stories since the IPO and the stock and everything. There's been stories about all the juvenile behavior on the plane and all the shit going on and stuff like this and private meetings or whatever. But it's almost, I guess you can say that, well, Vince realized that he had enough money to pay anybody to do anything or not say anything about anything he wanted to do. But I would have thought that it would have been when I got more money and my company went from being worth whatever million to 5 billion, that I got, at the same time I got older, that his behavior might have straightened up a bit rather than going straight back to the fucking frat house at college. I'm astonished. And there was
well, here's another part of the article.
I was about to say, in the rest of the article, there's some more tidbits as well. Go ahead with what you were going to do.
The board also is investigating allegations that WWE executive John Laurinaitis had a sexual relationship with the same former paralegal, according to people familiar with the inquiry. Additionally, the board is looking at a $1.5 million non-disclosure agreement reached in 2012 with an employee involving misconduct claims against Mr. Laurinaitis.
Boom goes the dynamite!
These people said. Mr. Laurinaitis, a former wrestler known as Johnny Ace, had been head of WWE talent relations for 8 years when he was forced to step down in 2012 and take a smaller role at the company. His demotion came around the same time as the $1.5 million deal with the employee, who alleged she had an affair with Mr. Laurinaitis and that he demoted her after she broke it off, people familiar with the non-disclosure agreement said. Mr. McMahon had restored Mr. Laurinaitis as head of talent relations last year. WWE has since placed Mr. Laurinaitis on administrative leave, a person familiar with the matter said.
So, John Laurinaitis, in 2012, when he was head of talent relations before, ended up costing was that $1.5 million?
That they know about right now, yes.
Well, that just in that incident. And remember around that time he was demoted or whatever however they phrased it, but we didn't know why, but it was obviously welcome news because he's a complete suck-up yes man. But then 8 years later, whatever it was, Vince decides, let's bring back John Laurinaitis. And somebody in that company had to say, well, Remember that he, about 7 or 8 years ago, cost us $1.5 million because he had an inappropriate relationship with one of the employees, and now you want to return him to the position of the head of talent relations, where he has to relate and have relations with all the talent.
I know the perfect person to put with him. I know the perfect person that can keep him in line.
And Vince himself puts him in there, and Vince himself gets a goddamn illegal paralegal, and Vince himself transfers the illegal paralegal over to Laurinaitis to do the same goddamn thing. Wouldn't you know who won the pony? Or in this case, wouldn't you know who won the pussy? How does that make any sense? John Laurinaitis is not Vince McMahon. John Laurinaitis has never been named as the person that's most integral to the future of the WWE to their stockholders. Vince McMahon has. John Laurinaitis is not the guy that owns 80% of the company at all the voting fucking shares in the stock scam that they did. Vince McMahon is. John Laurinaitis is not the guy there that everybody still looks at like, shit, we don't want to get on his bad side. Vince McMahon is. So as far as I can tell, when he just did it 2 years ago, and it was a reprise from 10 years ago, and it's cost the company a couple of $1 million and a lot of bad publicity, I would get the idea that John Laurinaitis' desk has probably already been cleaned out. That's just me, though.
I don't know. It seems like Vince is loyal to his fuck buddies. You never know.
Well, but then there comes the level of Trumpishness when they start cracking down on all the improprieties, and then all of a sudden, who was that? I never had her on Air Force One. I barely know that guy. Who was that? Vince, Laurinaitis, wasn't he a road warrior? No, Johnny is, he better take that big smile and those nice dimples and go apply to wash dishes at Denny's, because I don't think he's going to be back on the job for that company after finding two of them 10 years apart, both facilitated by the same guy that's under investigation for another $10 or $12 million.
He gets his power back right away. He's having an affair with his subordinate right away.
How do you... Again, why do people even want to have a fucking affair with people that you have to look at in the office? What if then you get stuck, regardless if you're even not mad at each other? Then you got to say, oh, boy, you look nice today, or whatever.
It was easy at Sony. There were different elevator banks.
Well, there you, and plus the music business, you know.
Hey, rock and roll.
What else did the Wall Street Journal have to impart? Is that the basic new information I believe we've covered?
Well, that's a lot of the information. A couple other things that I think the listeners would probably be interested in knowing, and it's some things that you've alluded to. But in terms of the stock, WWE Revenue includes a 5-year exclusive agreement with NBC Universal's Peacock streaming platform struck in 2021, valued at $1 billion. The company also has a TV licensing agreement with Fox Corp and with NBC Universal, and recently secured its first standalone international distribution deal with Disney plus Hotstar in Indonesia. Fox Corp and Journal parent News Corp share common ownership of course, the Wall Street Journal. And then, this is the important part. Mr. McMahon owns a majority of WWE Class B shares, giving him the bulk of shareholders' voting power, security filings show. The Class B shares have 10 times the voting power of Class A shares available to regular investors, and are owned exclusively by Mr. McMahon, his family, and trusts benefiting individual family members, the filings show. And then here's a quote from Brandon Ross, who does research. The bar is going to be reasonably high to wrestle the business from family control. So we could talk about that a little bit. He has all the power there, and that's one of the reasons I never would purchase that stock, and I never believed in that stock. It was more like you're investing in someone's personal piggy bank, and clearly he was treating things behind the scenes the same way he was the creative on camera. I'm going to do whatever I want. It's all about me. I'm going to have a good time. I don't care. But, you know, when you're a shareholder, you should care, and that's one of the reasons I never liked that stock was You're really just funding Vince McMahon to do whatever he wants. There's no transparency. You can't change that board of directors. You're not changing that fucking CEO or chairman.
Well, yeah. And from the time that I heard them talking about going public, issuing stock, selling stock, etc., Vince, that has always been Vince's company. He's always been able to do whatever he wanted to with it. He's gotten used to being able to do pretty much whatever he wants to. We've told all the stories of he just pisses in the face of police officers and FBI or fucking airline pilots or whatever. He needs to get the information he needs, regardless of who it's from, how he has to ask or whatever. But that's the way they set it up. And Jerry McDevitt, and I'm sure every other bit of expert legal advice, financial advice, they've got the best in the business in those areas of expertise. So they set the thing up, and I knew that from the start, where they could sell stock and people would give them a bunch of money, but nothing would change as far as Vince being in control, complete sole total control. But now with him at this age, the popularity starting to wane of the entire WWE, and this knowledge that these things have been going on, somebody, like you said, in the board of directors or near the board of directors is trying to say, let's get this guy out of here. Is it just somebody who just has a grudge? Is it somebody that stands to be in a better position because of it? Or is it just somebody that said, that fucking Vince, I've had it up to here with him and it's time to take him down a peg? But they're still going to have a heck of a time doing it. But with all this distraction, it can't be good for business. And that's why the idiots on the other side of the street ought to be trying to capitalize instead of, playing pretend wrestler.
Yeah, and again, we haven't heard anything from Nick Khan, and I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but it is interesting. All of a sudden, Vince is once again surrounded by Stephanie and Triple H. All of a sudden, Vince is bringing everything in-house and getting his people around him.
Circle the wagons. He knows Stephanie will jump in front of a bullet. Bruce will jump in front of a bullet. Triple H will try to hire somebody to jump in front of a bullet. I don't know if he'd do it himself for Vince. But he's tightening the inner circle because that's the people that he can trust. Or at least he thinks. You never know. This could be a Perry Mason.
And Vince always does have the option to go try and secure financing and take the company back private. And then he doesn't have to worry about a board investigation. But here's the bigger issue. In terms of what could be done in-house, him and his family control that company, even with the public shares. Very little could be done. What happens if, I'm not going to say when, but what happens if more stories come out and if NBC Universal or Fox say, we don't want to do business with you anymore? That's what you better worry about. If more stories come out, and if it gets beyond just being blowjobs for payment, it's not even that. A blowjob for work, and then you took it off the table. I mean, there's a whole bunch of shit, and there's more stories that may come out. That's what you got to worry about if you're WWE. What if one of your television partners, who's really putting up all the money for all the success the company's having right now, it's not coming from pay-per-view, it's coming from partners and broadcast rights. What happens if they say, we don't want to do business with you?
If they had to subsist on ticket sales, are they actually grossing? Well, it's more money, but adjusted for inflation or implosion. Adjusted for inflation, it would be interesting to see if just ticket sales for the WWE are even today 30 or 40% of what they were in the early and mid 80s. That would be interesting. But nevertheless, one thing that may be indicative of a problem is they're saying now, I don't know that anybody has attributed this to an official declaration from Netflix, but the rumors going around that they're going to ixnay the Vince documentary that's been planned and shot and a bunch of work done and was very close to premiering. And that pisses me off because not only did no in-depth book or I know there's a book coming out, and I know this documentary, and they were going to do a movie, but that certainly wouldn't have been in-depth because Vince was cooperating. But no really insightful, incisive piece on Vince like that has ever been done on him himself. He's been in the periphery of talking about the WWE or other stars. I would have loved to have seen that documentary just to see what they came up with. But if Netflix is pulling that because of this, I mean, that seems to me to be sensitive, because if I was a TV network that wasn't beholden in any way to the WWE and didn't care what they thought of me and had this deal and had this stuff already shot, I'd be airing that thing, because Vince as a person and as somebody that people are talking about hadn't been this hot in a long time.
It was with their cooperation it was going to be made. A Vince McMahon documentary or a Vince McMahon biopic that's going to be honest and try to tell the truth, I'm all for that. But a WWE sanctioned with McMahon family cooperation Vince biopic or doc is going to be bullshit.
Well, you may be right there. So, well, see, I didn't know Netflix. Was this just a deal they made to do this series, or are they in bed with some of the big corporations that everybody's interconnected with? Are they doing ongoing business with the WWE? Is there some reason why they would bend over backwards to lie and sugarcoat and present a fairy tale version? Or, you know, I guess just because Vince probably insisted on final edit approval.
Well, it's Bill Simmons. Bill Simmons is the guy who did the Andre the Giant documentary filled with bullshit that wasn't exactly true. He's someone who's always courted a relationship with WWE and really kissed their ass and played ball.
From ESPN.
Yeah, he's done some good sports documentaries, but his wrestling shit is so suspect it makes the rest of his stuff come under suspicion. But he's always kissed their ass, so it was going to be a very, very friendly piece.
Well, that's what started this whole thing, was a friendly piece.
God damn it.
Should I do a Costanza? Are we done here?
Is there anything else with this story? I mean, how are you going to feel if one of these girls that you know, that you have a good relationship with, that you worked with, if one of them say, I never told you, but Vince was harassing me and I accidentally did something one night and I got punished for it. Do you think that could happen? I mean, do you think this is pervasive?
Well, and don't say I accidentally did something, like, you know, like Cartman said, yeah, I tripped and fell down and his dick went in my mouth, or what, you know, they were coerced or pressured or whatever, and they didn't accidentally do it. They did it under duress or under, you know, improper circumstances. But I mean, I would believe them at this point. Before, like I said, I would believe that Vince was capable of underhanded business practices and, you know, doing old promotional tricks to fuck with opponents or opposition. And I would think that, you know, he valued the bottom line and would try to get everything he could out of a negotiation or some. I wasn't saying he was a saint, but I'm just astonished, I guess, at the lack of maturity of somebody that you thought, because Vince always had that aura to me and to a lot of people, that you can't imagine Vince on the toilet taking a shit. You can't imagine, you know, Vince at a laundromat. He's not a normal person. He was always put, even when he didn't have his hair combed, when you'd get to his house 8:30 in the morning, he's got his workout clothes on and his fucking hair's flying around everywhere and there's no hairspray. But he's still slick shaved because of his habits, and he looked more put together and authoritarian than, you know, most people anyway. And it just, you would think that this guy that runs this business, that's made this much money, that's, you know, like I said, it wasn't burdensome to work for him when you were in the inner circle. You could joke and you could laugh, but you could also do that with a favorite school teacher, which that's the kind of vibe. I didn't want to misbehave. People didn't want to fuck up, or they, you know, watched what they said, you know, around the boss, because ultimately Vince was the boss. And like I said, straighten up your tie and sit up straight in your chair, proper posture. The boss is in the room. And now he's just a fucking raving frat boy. It's insane. I would have never thought.
And again, the last several years, he surrounded himself once again with Bruce, who had been thrown out of the company, and Laurinaitis, who it turns out now his demotion wasn't just because Triple H was taking over. So look who he's surrounding himself with.
Well, I don't know. And at least nobody has said that Bruce was
an enabler? A Vince enabler?
Nobody said that Bruce was hopping over to the neighbor's garden Bruce has a lovely wife. They've been married for years and years and years.
Yeah, don't worry about it. No one wants to fuck him.
Well, I was about to say, nobody said that. They haven't had to pay any money out because of Bruce. But I wonder, was Bruce ever watching the door?
It was like JJ. It was like when Miss Atlanta Lively punched Flair and knocked him into the pool.
Yeah, JJ was in the closet with his fucking...
That's Bruce. Can I just hide in the closet? Can I just watch in the closet?
Come out of the closet, Bruce. No, I'm kidding. That's from South Park. Tom Cruise is in the closet and he won't come out. They're going to come out of the closet, Tom. No. All righty. Well, we don't
end the show, Jim.
We don't know what else will come out of this closet, this storage closet of rumor and suspicion and NDAs, but we will continue to keep you up to date. And as we mentioned on the drive-thru this week, more frivolity, jocularity, and some legal opinions. Unfortunately, that interview was already taped before we found out about the next 9 million, but we'll talk about the first 3 million with Stephen P. New. That's on the drive-thru this week. And until then, I believe we're done here. So in parting, I'd like to wish you love, peace, and soul. Thank you. Fuck you. Bye-bye, everybody.